So you've been in the trade for a while and you're getting the itch to start your own shop and make that move. Fortunately for you, a good friend of yours owns an industrial space and has offered to give you a pretty sweet deal on the rent. Should you jump at this opportunity, or is it something you should reconsider? What's up guys, Ian Sandusky from Lakewood Machine and Tool back here again for Practical Machinist. And today on Shop Talk, we're gonna be diving back into the Practical Machinist forums to cover a poster who came onto the forums with exactly this situation on their hand. But before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to make sure you never miss a video. Let's get into it. Okay guys, so as promised today, we are going to be diving into another starting a shop thread. You see a lot of these, across the internet, especially on the shop management and ownership subforum on Practical Machinist. This is kind of what this subforum is for. It's about starting shops, running a shop. A lot of the things we talk about here, that's another place you can go to talk about them. So it's not uncommon to see these kind of threads. When you see these threads, sometimes you see amazing business plans, sometimes you see people just trying to feel it out, and it's difficult to tell how many people actually end up pulling the trigger on a situation like this. But this one caught my eye specifically out of, there's a lot of these that we don't cover, because it got a lot of great response from the forum members. And as I've said before, there is a wealth of knowledge on that shop management and ownership subforum at practicalmachinist.com. It's one of the best resources you can have, especially if you're someone like me who, for a long time, I didn't know a lot of other shops. I didn't have any mentors out there. I didn't have, people who had experience in the trade, aside obviously from people I knew from here, to help me out and guide me. So it was a great place to get other information from outside sources that's, as unbiased as it can be on the situation. And when it comes to this thread, the information on it was so good and the answers were so interesting that I thought it was worth covering, even though we've kind of tread this general road before, I guess. So the original poster of the thread, they came on and it sounded like they said they'd been in the trade for about a decade. Things were going well for them, and they had the itch to start their own shop. They're really thinking about it. They're putting in the work. And fortunately for them, they have a friend. And their friend, this was kind of one of the key components of the arrangement they were looking to make when starting the shop, was that their friend owns a industrial space. Now, the original poster did come on and post some pictures of this, so check it out if you want to see what we're talking about here. It genuinely looks like a good light industrial space. I think he said it was about 60 feet by 100 feet. It kind of looks like a old auto garage. He said something about coolant storage or oil storage there, so that leads me to believe that this is an old auto garage, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great light industrial space. When you look at the units we have here, although in our side of the industrial park, we don't have any automotive here, this is mirrored. This whole industrial park is mirrored on the other side of, this little byway here. And on the other side, there's tons of auto shops, pretty much operating in the same kind of spaces as these. So right off the bat, looks like a pretty nice space. The deal was that the friend, because they own the space and there was no one in there, they said, listen, if you want to start this shop, you can store everything you want in there until you're ready to go. I'm only going to charge you $200 a month for rent until your shop is actually up and running. After you're up and running, I'm going to charge you $1,500 a month for rent. So, at first glance, that's a pretty sweet deal. He's not burning a ton of money, $5 grand a month or $2 grand a month just to get set up. He's not really going to start paying until he's open. Sounds like a pretty good deal. So he came on and he wanted to know from the forum members, specifically, does this sound like a good deal? What are people's experience with it? The responses he got from the forum, as I mentioned, were awesome, and they held a lot of insight. So we're going to kind of run down the answers in relevance to the question that was asked, because it did kind of deviate, but I thought it was important too. So the first thing that people pointed out there that I kind of saw myself was the size of the unit, 60 by 100 feet. you know, that's not that big. It's big, but it's not that big. It's a great starter space. But I think we've all had the experience when you're moving into a new house, or, you know, you just got a new rental, and you look at the living room when there's nothing in it, and you go, man, this is a huge space, this is gonna be great. Then you put in a couch, and your TV, and an end table, and a coffee table, and all of a sudden you find yourself having to, you know, squeeze between the wall and the TV to get into the room, and you say, what happened? Well, it's because spaces look way bigger before you put things in them. A very similar thing happens to machine shops. You know, you look at a space like this and you go, yeah, you could put 2 mills there, a lathe against that wall, and we're good to go. Well, by the time you figure out, hey, listen, I need to have clearance of this much behind the machine to be able to access the doors. I need to keep the right side of the machine open so I can load things through the side if necessary. I need to have space to work in front of it. I need workbenches. I need tool storage. You know, even just a simple tool chest takes up space. All of a sudden, that place is packed. Now, think you have 3 skids of material coming in from a customer that are this high. There are shops that are the size of the one that this guy is describing that I've been into and I've seen, where they literally have to go every morning with a forklift and unload skids from the unit before they can start working for the day. And then at the end of the day, they need to go load all the skids back in before they can close at night. Well, what do you do if it's raining? What do you do if it's snowing? What do you do? You know, it's one of those things that seems like it shouldn't be an issue, but the real deal is when it comes to working for yourself, you know, it sounds like this guy wants to keep this as a small operation, at least to start, which is smart, you know, one-man show. Every minute that you're doing something and you're working that you're not being paid for is a cost. And we've talked before about how important it is to, if not mitigate, at least manage your costs, especially when you're new, in order to keep cash flow going, keep the bank happy, all that kind of stuff. Every minute that you are having to rearrange stuff in your shop to be able to get through, or, you know, you have to go take out all your inspection tools because you don't have room for them because your shop is small, or loading skids, or all these kind of things that are extra, they are costs. And when you're starting out, all those costs don't sound like they're gonna add up, but every single one can add up. You could be killing an hour a day or more not getting paid as a cost if your space is not big enough. So it's something to keep in mind. The second thing that people brought up in regards to the space is that it's rented. I've harped on before about the importance of owning your shop. I realize it is not always possible, but it is something you should always keep in mind. And people on the forum, you know, were bringing this up as well. Firstly, if you own the building and the land that it's situated on, that you're operating out of, it gives you so much more flexibility. So let's look at this situation for a minute. Let's say this guy said that in the forum, in a later reply, he said, you know, I'm starting this shop because I know this other shop that told me they would give me all the automotive machining work that I could handle. So let's ignore the validity of that statement for a second. Let's pretend that's true. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I don't know, and it doesn't matter. But for the sake of this discussion, let's pretend that's true. If he has a ton of work coming in, that means he's probably going to expand. And if he expands and gets, you know, 1, 2 more people, maybe a couple more machines, he's gonna need to, as we just mentioned, expand his location. If he owns the building and owns the land, it's much, much easier to potentially build an addition or build an outbuilding or, you know, renovate, do things to optimize the space, expand the space right in location. So if I can build an addition on my building, that means I can keep the shop running while I do it. If I'm building a secondary building, I can keep my shop running and cash flow going while I do it. Renovation kind of sucks, but sometimes you got to do it. The fact is that if he rents, very rarely is a landlord, even if it's your buddy, going to invest in building an addition or a secondary building or whatever it is in any kind of deal that's going to feel fair at all to the tenant. It's just not interesting for them. They, you know, unless you are a massive facility and you commit to a 10-year deal, it's going to be worth millions. It's not realistic, especially when we're talking about most small shops. So then what is he going to have to do? He's going to have to go find a new location. So now he needs to find a new location. It could be more expensive to rent, so his overhead goes up. He needs to shut down. You know, he can't be running if he's moving a shop from one location to the other. Yeah, you can stagger it out a little bit, but ultimately he's gonna have to shut down, pack the machines, rig them to a new location, get them set up, get them calibrated, and that entire time that he's moving is gonna be losing money. So if you can avoid it in this situation, buying is always better than renting when it comes to that aspect. The other point when it comes to owning the location that I hadn't really thought of, that people on the forum actually brought up that I thought was fantastic, was let's go back to assuming that he wants to keep this as a small shop. You know, either a one-man show or a couple of employees. You know, he's not building a corporation, or at least that's not his goal right now. When he goes to sell and he goes to retire, as a self-employed person, you don't really get as much. You know, you don't have a pension if you work at a place that has pensions. You basically are counting on money you put away during your working life to sustain you. Yeah, you know, depending on where you are, you might get some kind of a government pension, but especially the way things are going, guys, government pensions are not much. They're definitely not going to sustain your lifestyle if you hopefully lived a pretty good life. So if he rents, by the time he goes to sell, you know, yeah, you know, he hopes he can sell his business and his machines. This works out less often than you'd think. As well, you know, by the time that comes, unless you have multi-million-dollar machines with low hours, perfect maintenance records, and they're in demand in your area, you know, there's a buyer for them. Machines, especially older ones, like some of the ones I got, by the time you go to sell, you can really only count on them for the scrap value. And scrap value is what, 10 cents a pound for steel? I don't even know what it is these days. It's nothing. So when he goes to sell or he goes to retire, if he rents, there's not a whole lot to fall back on. Conversely, if he's lucky enough and can figure out how to buy a location, first of all, if he goes to sell, we talked about this in a previous video not too long ago about a guy going to buy a shop that was a rented location. What did everybody say? You're just buying the business, it's not really worth much. If you have a location, you own the property, you own the building, that's way more attractive for a potential buyer. As well, let's say you can't sell the business as is, you know, you scrap out your machines, whatever it is, you can still sell the building and the property. And industrial units, at least everywhere where I've seen, are in crazy demand, especially smaller ones, because they don't really build them these days. They build massive buildings. They don't build, you know, 1,200, 3,000, 5,000 square foot units anymore. So if you can get a hold of one, people are gonna pay probably more than you think they're worth. And in any case, very rarely does property go down in value. So fortunately, if he goes to retire now, he can sell his business or just sell the property. And while it may not sustain his entire retirement, it's at least a chunk towards that that's gonna help. I fully understand that, especially when you're trying to start a business, we all don't have the resources to go and buy a building. It's just not feasible for people, and I understand that. The only reason I harp on this so much is, in my experience and from what I've seen, when it comes to starting a business, especially in manufacturing, there really are some decisions that you can only make once. Yeah, you can rent and go and buy later. That's good. You should aim towards that. But if you really think about it, if you really put in the work, maybe you wait a little bit longer, maybe you build up your savings a bit more, whatever you have to do, if you can swing buying a building off the bat, generally from my experience and from what I saw on the forums, it's something that you're gonna wanna do as quickly as you can. The last thing that forum members pointed out that I agree with when it comes to the situation is getting a sweet deal from a friend is awesome. It's amazing. Everybody wishes they could have that. You know, there are a ton of people out there that would have not half the success that they've had during their lives if they didn't have friends to help them out like this. You know, this is when we talk about building a manufacturing network and a personal network towards, or I guess a business network, this is what we're talking about. These are the kind of deals that will come up, and that's great. That said, when it comes to a situation like this, I feel like often, and people in the forum said this as well, people rely too much on the goodwill of friends to hope this works out. Essentially, you're gonna wanna get it in writing. No matter how long you've known this person, no matter how good of friends you are, you do not want to rely solely on their goodwill for the existence of your business. And you know, to extrapolate that, you don't wanna depend on them to be able to put food on your family's table. You wanna get it in writing. The reason you want to get it in writing is, although right now everything looks great, $200 a month to start, $1,500 when it gets going, what happens if, you know, all of a sudden his friend has to sell? Something happens, I don't know, I don't want to talk about all the negative situations that could happen to them, but they have to sell. What happens to this guy? What if the company starts doing really well and the friend says, hey, do you know what? Actually, your rent's going up to $3,000 because now that's market rate. What happens? What happens if the friend gets in very dire financial straits and says, listen, I need to raise the rent to $3,000 even though I don't want to? All these things need to be outlined in paper, not only to protect you, but to protect your friend. You know, one of the biggest things when it comes to deals that I feel like gets overlooked a lot, we've talked about it when it comes to partners, but with these deals, it's important too, is what is the exit strategy? There has to be some kind of clause in there to say, after 1 year, if this isn't working out, this is what we do. Or we have to give each other X number of months notice before X changes. We both agree, we both sign, you know, this should be a lawyer approved document in order to protect both parties. Because especially when you're dealing with friends, it's a lot easier to point at a piece of paper and say, hey, listen, this is what it is. I don't like it either, but we signed it. It's a legal document. We have to stick to it. Than saying, well, do you know what? This is how I think it should be. You know, I am someone who is highly allergic to getting into business with friends because I've seen so many bad situations happen. You know, I had a little situation once, and fortunately I saved it, even though the friendship kind of died after that. The point is that if you want to maintain your friendship, you're going to want to put as much business stuff on paper and in legalese as you can, so you two guys don't need to think about it. You can just revisit the contract whenever it says you have to revisit it, and at that point, if it's not working, you have your exit clause, and hopefully everybody walks away happy. But you're going to want to make sure you do get it in writing. In any case, guys, I'd like to know in the comments below, have you ever been in this situation? What do you think this guy should do? Would you rent off a friend? Would you say, do you know what? I keep business and pleasure completely separate. Has this blown up in your face, or have you seen it happen? We'd love to know in the comments below, because this is the kind of information that helps everybody out, okay? As always, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to make sure you never miss a video. Thank you very much for watching, guys. You take care.